what's beautiful about the solo 401k, 20 or 25% of your net earnings, you can also contribute. So a very simple example here. Let's just say you made 100K as a realtor in 2022.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It podcast, Passive Investing Edition. My name is Randy Smith. I am your host today, and I am really excited to have our guest, Dan Kryzanowski, with us. Dan is going to educate us on some areas that not too many folks know about. So super excited to have you here, Dan.
Awesome, Randy. Great to be with y'all today.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, talk about your background, and then how you found passive investing?
For sure. So as I like to keep the math simple. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So, you can bring your office jokes and such.
The office? Yeah.
I've already seen in the chat line here, people bringing up their best jokes. And, graduated undergrad in 2000. So like most of us late Gen Xers, you work for a name brand company, you max out your 401k, maybe you get a little tired of that. You get an MBA. I did the same post Merrill Lynch. I went out to Thunderbird, a great school in Arizona, split time between the Bay Area, Arizona, and Guadalajara, Mexico, actually. So came back with a bottle of tequila and a wife, and heard I was not the first person to do that. So following in tradition. And was with GE, so I joke with some of my younger mentees, this was still the best company in the world about 15 years ago. So was with General Electric, GE Capital, GE Real Estate for a bit, doing airport real estate of all things. So where UPS flies in and drives out of was kind of my shtick. And, it's funny, I was talking to a real good friend in the Northeast this morning, and we were talking about different inflection points. And of course, 2008, was an inflection point, much how 2020 or frankly this decade is for folks. And my decision point, and I rarely go against my gut, but I did, instead of staying in Austin, Texas, before Austin was, Austin, went back into kind of the warm and fuzzy, the bosom, as they say, of General Electric for about 3 more years before we got back to Austin. And then from that point, like anything, the whole, I'd say, alternative passive journey really sprung from there.
Awesome. Okay. So corporate America, fairly well educated, MBA. I forgot that you actually went to Thunderbird, which is literally like a stone's throw from my house. I forgot about that. Interesting. Yes. And it sounded like you liked working for large, well-respected brand of GE and a lot of the benefits that come along with that. So I'm curious, has that actually played into your investing strategy in any way or influenced it in any way?
It actually has a lot. And, Randy, I know you had a great corporate career. So let's think of our friends that are still there. Well, in some ways I joke and call it the 1%, meaning that it's funny because folks that, and myself, very much stereotyping myself, you go to a name brand school, you work at a Fortune 100 company, et cetera. This is kind of your world. And in turn, what do? Well, you max out your 401k or IRA. You might even have a stock of some some treasuries or something that are going to expire in 30 years. But this is just, how the game was played, how our parents did it, and their life seemed to go okay. So, it's kind of copy paste, go in the rat race. You're investing, you have one of those, oh my gosh, moments every 5 or 10 years when the market steps back a little bit, but not as much. So, that said, not just on the investment side, but from a lifestyle and career, I went from the, I guess it'd be the commute or reverse commute in Stamford, Connecticut, down here to Austin, Texas, once again, before Austin was, the bee's knees, as they say.
Yeah.
And guess what? I did not have the meatball on my business card. I did not have an X $100,000 marketing budget. There's a whole lot of things I did not have. But I realized also there was such a disconnect what I was investing in previously. So whether it was a stock or a bond, even a REIT per se, versus doing something, tangible with people that I knew in one of my communities or something brick and mortar. So this was kind of the mind shift. And right off the bat, although I maybe not have put bets down, on things, I feel I've had a pretty good crystal ball what's been going on here in Central Texas. So, for example, as East Austin has grown, I was doing the equivalent of crowdfunding before the Jobs Act. So bars, restaurant, female entrepreneurs, folks of color, great investments thus far for me. Had a few goose eggs, and you're going to have that, especially if you drop chips in the startup world. The first one was a comedy tour. Okay. So I was sitting there with my wife, said, hope you laugh, because these might be $1,000 write-offs, which, of course,
right.
And then, a final just kind of timestamp. Our son is a St. Patrick's Day baby, and you're kind of in that baby bliss and such. And I thought this was a layup. A gentleman was looking for a short-term loan, was referred by a friend, and she's a real conservative CPA financially, and gave him a check. Son was born 2 months later, wasn't paid back. I'm like, we'll just roll it 3 more months. It wasn't, and then I had to learn the whole, the ugly, how the world really works sometimes.
Sure.
I think is a good lesson as I think we enter this, end of 22, 23, however things are going to work. It's not going to be like late 2010s going forward. So, with that is that I put myself, one may argue, to the other end of the bell curve, but I view it, although probably a few less dollars than some high net worth and billionaires, what I consider 21st century diversification.
Excellent. Yeah. So thank you for walking through that. That gives me a much better perspective as to where you are coming from and how that potentially leads into your next phase. And you mentioned, or at least alluded to, there's this population that is well educated, that moves into corporate America, that is very fortunate to do very well. They probably max out their 401k. They probably are starting to play around a little bit outside of that. But outside of that, there's not a lot of education that occurs that teaches you what else to do beyond that. And then you have this population of small business owners that are probably doing very well as well. They don't have some of the added, investment structure that is provided to corporate American employees. So they might play around with some other investments as well. But the general story that I heard would be people doing or starting to invest more in less traditional investments, but much, much riskier investments than the type of investments that you and I talk about on a daily basis. So I'm curious about that transition for you, like working in corporate America, where you start to play around with maybe some of these more risky investments. How did you find some of the other non-traditional investments that you and I are growing to love in our day-to-day?
Some of it is, just think of who you hang out with or hang out with less. Say when you leave, especially the likes of a GE, and this is the corporate campus, not in New York City, but in Connecticut. It's easy to put yourself in a bubble when things are going pretty well, to be honest with you.
Sure.
And what could happen, it depends on your age, but let's say you were age 60 at 2008, that's a tough pill to swallow, and you might have to make some decisions. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, with that, I kind of took a different approach. And I would say, and I won't share the early New York City stories, but I was probably one of the few guys that worked on Wall Street that did not have roommates that were other investment bankers or traders. My one roommate, he planned the after party for Saturday Night Live. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, if you have a paid session of your podcast, we can probably charge for some of those stories.
I'm sure. Yeah. Very cool. So, not your normal Wall Street folks, though, is what you're saying.
No, definitely not. But the good thing is I think the net benefit is two things. One is you see how challenging it is at times to make $1 for real when you are a small business owner. The other time is you see all these tremendous opportunities and how your dollar as an investor can make an impact. I mean, if I do $100 in a bond, whatever, say, Fidelity may allow me to do in my legacy rollover IRA, that's not going to impact or have any tangible impact. Whereas, I have a friend, they have a smaller materials business in Nebraska. We have a loan, I think, in the $5,000 or $10,000 amount range. That does a lot. That money replicates over and over. It keeps somebody in business, and it keeps other projects and things moving along in this community. It's very impactful. So I think this is a true win-win-win. Keep on adding the wins, because this money keeps on getting recycled in a very good way. And then on top of that, I'm using my retirement dollars, and cherry on top, I'm actually using my Roth, my post-tax retirement dollars.
Okay.
That's earning double digits. Whereas going back earlier, if I just put, $100 in ABC bond, outside of only earning maybe 1 or 2% today, I'm not impacting anybody else. So the big takeaway is, as I started to, hang around with, other circles of folks, I became more attuned to what people invest in and some of the challenges they have. And I feel I've kind of refined that over the past, decade plus of who I either advise and or will invest in.
Okay. So let's dig into that a little bit. You have some exposure to some different investment opportunities and avenues and tools, just due to the nature of your experience and the people you're associating with. Can you share with the audience what some of those other options are that are available not only to you, but to the general public as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first one that might seem a little common, but a decade plus ago wasn't. I was a co-best man in a wedding. Asked the gentleman what he did, and he said flipped houses. I'm like, yeah. And then he said 15%. I got excited. And then I got to learn about, this is how somebody operates. It's almost like infinite banking, but with the pool of your maybe closest 10 friends or, frankly, 10 investors now that you can always tap on. So, something also about the timeliness of this is always say, obviously, if you have Piggybank checking account, you can fund day of per se, but there's other different types of retirement accounts that you can do these last minute short-term loans. And I'm not saying these crazy pie in the sky ideas, but for, if you have a comfort level, and frankly, it's extremely lucrative. If you do the diligence on the other side, but if you know about the short-term loan market when it comes to points and everything else, that's one example. Another benefit I have, I know some folks have mentioned on my LinkedIn, Capital Factory. It's kind of the mecca for everything downtown startup here in Austin. I have the benefit to talk to do over 40 or 50 mentor sessions a year. I naturally resonate with a few. We have a few more offline discussions. This leads to a check or two a year. And these startups are something that is, I think, and I view it as something that could have a tremendous impact. So let's just take one, Hover Cities, one company that I'm fully enamored with. So for our audience that's in especially the Southeast or by the water, you get a hurricane or something that comes through. If you have FEMA come in, you get a big, 20-foot TEU, big ugly box that comes in that serves as for supplies, maybe for living space, a whole bunch of things. Imagine and it might take a while to come. Imagine kind of on demand if there's something that drones in that's hexagonal like Jenga, but it's like an eco home, a smart home. It's pretty, it's eco this, etc. That's just one example of this is something that's patented. It's like, wow. I mean, somebody did a whole lot of work. This is a horse that I want to get behind for multiple reasons. And then in the middle of these two worlds, maybe, minus the sizzle and not as, we'll say, vanilla as real estate, it's what other groups could, from a network effect. By me investing in a particular, the next Zuckerberg per se, and I've done a few of these WizKid investments, it wasn't blindly with them. There's a little bit of a selfish motive, knowing who the other investors were to just like going to a conference, you pay a few grand to go, sometimes you do that via a riskier investment. So, and then separate from all that, I do a whole bunch of wonderfully boring real estate that pays monthly dividends and all that good stuff, which, always happy to chat on.
Okay. Yeah. So all kinds of fun and exciting things of full spectrum, from being a short money lender on flips to some really great technologies and emerging market stuff. So very cool. Now, I know your expertise, or definitely your background and your experience, is leveraging kind of unique tools to help bring some added benefit to the investors in addition to the investment opportunities that you're providing. So can we spend a little bit of time talking about some of those unique tools that you have?
Sure. And this is great. I mean, if there's anything that, maybe this is the big and bold, that anybody takes away from the discussion is that you can use your retirement dollars to invest in private or alternatives.
Okay.
And so why don't we know about this? I guess first, no surprise when it does, and I don't say this in a rude way, but when it doesn't really fit Wall Street's business model,
Mm-hmm.
or it's slightly complicated versus here's a target date, the year 2040 fund,
Right.
the likes of a Fidelity and Schwab, they're not going to promote a certain product. I did my undergrad at Wharton. I was at Wall Street, etc. What surprised me is something outside of the headlines where it's like, oh, Mitt Romney never paid taxes and Peter Thiel. Outside of one of those headlines, you're never even gain any knowledge that this world of self-directed accounts exist. So
Mm-hmm.
just a quick, I'll nerd out for a second, but there's
Yeah.
self-directed IRA, SDIRA. It's kind of the Gatorade term. It's been around from the 70s. It's legal. A lot of people use it. The two most common transactions have been, buying a rental house and renting it out, just like you do your Piggybank checking account, and then investing passively. Hey, Randy, me, you, and 8 of our buddies are going to put 100K into a self-storage facility and let our other buddy run it. It's kind of what
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the two most vanilla examples that we see out here. The self-directed IRA, once again, it's the common term. There are multiple legacy custodians. There's a bunch of up-and-coming players. Full disclosure, I was involved early with Rocket Dollar. I appreciate how they have flat pricing, no asset under management, so it doesn't feel like you're in the old stodgy investment advisor model.
Yep.
A separate side point here is just briefly for our realtor friends and our self-employed friends. Is there's a solo 401k, and for me, this is the true light bulb moment. As more people, for one reason or another, are becoming self-employed.
Okay. So you also mentioned Piggybank. You've referenced that a couple of times. So when you're saying Piggybank IRA, can you talk about that real quick?
Yeah, it might be the Austin coffee kicking in here, or the Movember blonde mustache. But yeah, so I keep things very simple. So I'll admit, some of I just got out of surgery. So here's my buddy ET. So I won the contest for best Halloween outfit because I was gimping around. But I bring it back to very simple terms. Everybody can think of their piggy bank, literally their piggy bank that they probably invested in a lemonade stand to help a friend, or you probably bought lemonade, not really investing, but with the neighbor's kids on the corner. It's very tangible. Sure. That's something you do with your money every day. And I share the concept of the piggy bank because your retirement's not this account that's way out there that you can't access. It's your money, just like, once again, going to your piggy bank, you can do that and have access to your retirement dollars. And I think once folks gain that, it's a big wow moment for, it's like, wow, everything that I've done, or there's people I know that they work for VC funds. They want to get that 10X, that 100X, but they don't even know that they can have a self-directed IRA account to use their retirement. I know realtors, and I've been to the NAR shows before, the Association of Realtors. 1.3 million realtors across the country, a very strong majority still are not aware that they can have a solo 401k, that they could, in a rock star year, which probably some folks had, especially in the first half of this year, ended up contributing over $60,000, for 2022. This is crazy powerful information that folks aren't aware of, that once you become aware of it, you're like, wow, from a head to toe tax advantaged return, this is above and beyond what we've had in our corporate jobs before.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of that a little bit, because this is going to be published probably at an opportune time where there are some listeners that could actually take some action, have some tremendous tax savings through leveraging some of these tools. So let's go down both the self-directed account and the solo 401k. So the self-directed account, can anybody use a self-directed account, or are there certain criteria that need to be met?
Yeah, great question. So the short answer is yes. Anybody in the U.S. with a U.S. address can have a self-directed IRA, much like you can have a rollover IRA, or as you were up and coming early in your career before you hit income limits, a Roth IRA. Very similar. Anybody can contribute that $6,000, $7,000 a year, or at this point, when that, let's just say you have 100,000 in your Fidelity, you can roll that money into a self-directed. And, I say capital S, capital D, like San Diego. It's not, oh, Fidelity gives me a few choices and I'm in a few different mutual funds. No, this is where the world is open. And let me talk about briefly what that is. What I like is the IRS tells you what you cannot do. So no life insurance, no collectibles. And the big thing is not yourself or your linear family. What does that mean? Not your primary residence. Not say the beach house that your parents stay in. Your kid goes to NYU, not a flat on Washington Square. Basically, though, everything else is in play. In a weird way, your brother and sister is not a linear relationship. Although you have to watch, give them a sweetheart deal. Jokes aside, or bring the jokes. Your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, they're not linear. So, I guess the government thinks we don't want to do business with them. But the main thing.
Yeah. So specifically, though, from my understanding is, as an individual who owns the self-directed account, you personally cannot benefit from the investment until retirement age, right? So any proceeds need to go back into the self-directed account, and you can't technically receive any personal benefit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the high level laws, such as withdrawing before age 59 and a half, there's still the early withdrawal fee if you pull it out early, for example. You cannot commingle with your personal checking. You cannot invest in your own company with your retirement dollars. So, but as I said, the rules are pretty basic. They're pretty black and white. For true hands-off passive investing, much like with your normal IRA or your day job, let's say you work till you're 67, you have that 401k going. Great. Keep it going until you hit RMDs in your 70s. Same deal with the self-directed IRA. You can still have that, let's say a traditional pre-tax, that tax deferral benefits until you have to start pulling out money for an RMD. There's a lot of folks, frankly, that go to the grave with it because, they have other pools of money for their RMDs, or, they pass early. So yeah, great question.
Okay. Yeah. So for our self-directed IRA, really anybody who's got an IRA, has an old 401k, can be leveraging those. Now, the solo 401k is geared more towards the entrepreneur, but it gives a similar tax advantaged saving account that then you could leverage for some of these other passive investments, right?
Yeah, and the solo 401k, it's dynamic. And Randy, you're spot on. I mean, the government base said, hey, how do we benefit folks that are self-employed? And just to be clear, once again, I like how you're told what is not. So what is not self-employed income? Collecting a rent check? No. Day trading? No. The very non-technical term is doing stuff. What does that mean? You're a one-man consultant, a husband-wife team without W-2 employees, has a flower shop. That's a great one. You do a bunch of stuff on Etsy around the holidays. Yes, all of that qualifies you to open the account, and then the respective accounts that qualify. So let's take a realtor as a very common example. Right off the bat, much like your W-2 buddies, in 2022, that first $20,500 you're deferring right off the bat. In addition, what's beautiful about the solo 401k, 20 or 25% of your net earnings you can also contribute. So a very simple example here. Let's just say you made 100K as a realtor in 2022, and I'll round numbers here, but right off the bat, you're deferring that 20K, like your friends in the W-2 job, and then 20% of the 100's another 20K. So right off the bat, you're at 40,000. You have a rock star year, say you make roughly 300,000. You can be looking at to the tune of over 60,000 that you're contributing. Add on a few more thousand if you're over 50. And one final thing, just to pull it back to our, couple, the husband-wife team in the flower shop, right off the bat, that first, 20,500 for both of them, that first 41,000 can be deferred. So when you have an ongoing business, you know what your revenue is going to be, much like folks in a high-paying W-2 that don't sweat maxing out their 401k. Right off the bat, you can do this. Two things that I'll share. First, I'll share the cool, and then kind of the PSA, because we are in December here. The cool is, you're going to have a big deal, or you're consulting on some crazy thing and going to get paid $500,000 in February. You can actually contribute to your account in January. You don't have to wait for the check to clear. That's pretty cool.
Got it.
Now, especially because we're in December here, the thing about these accounts, it needs to be opened in the calendar year to benefit for calendar year contribution. So very specifically here, and whether it's the likes of a Rocket Dollar or another provider, you probably want this opened up by mid-December, maybe December, 18th, 19th at the latest. You want this account formalized in 2022 if you are going to contribute for 2022.
Got it. So the account needs to be set up with a couple of weeks to spare in the year. Now, do they actually have to contribute the dollars this calendar year, or can they contribute the dollars up before tax day?
Whether it's, April 15th, or if you're doing an extension like a lot of us do that are passive investors here, during that window, you can do it for 2020. So as long as the account is open this year. One thing that I will share, let's say, and, Randy, I think you're a great, example. Your corporate probably have a pretty sizable, we'll call it old 401k, aka rollover IRA. You may open the solo 401k this year doing a bit of consulting, contribute zero, but say roll over, 100,000 into one of these self-directed, the solo 401k, for example. And there's a few reasons. One, you may turn around and invest that. Some other bells and whistles benefits of the solo 401k, you can actually borrow up to 50,000. So as long as you pay yourself back over 5 years. So for folks that say, hey, I have an idea. I don't want to go to friends and family. I don't want to do a seed round or Series A or any of that. But I need, 40, 50K. And if it works, great. It'll play out. If it doesn't, I'll go back to my W-2 job in a few months. You basically can borrow from yourself. So as long as you pay yourself back at a reasonable interest rate, probably, 5 to 10%, which stated otherwise is another way to boost up your balance on your retirement.
Awesome. So really neat tools that can have a huge impact, especially if compounded over years in conjunction with some of the great investment opportunities that companies like yours offer as well. So it's really important, though, that you follow the rules and the guidelines, you have a good guide, and you have somebody on your side fighting for you as you use these things. So my understanding is you actually have these available, or you can connect our listeners with folks that can assist with this process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always a fan of education. So, rocketdollar.com/learn is a great award-winning knowledge base. There's a gentleman, Matt Sorensen, with 1T. I'd suggest looking into him also. I'm LinkedIn. I tend to check my LinkedIn pretty religiously. Obviously, Please said you heard it here first. I'm happy to have a brief one-on-one. Let's just say it's the holidays. I may have a discount code or two for you to reach out. But be more than happy to. LinkedIn is probably the best. And please put a personalized note, because I do get a fair number of invitations here, and I'm happy to have a brief chat. Especially kind of during this. As we hit mid-December here, because it is timely, especially if somebody wants to go with the solo K.
Okay, very good. Well, yeah, I do have a few questions I like to ask everybody, and we didn't spend a lot of time digging into specific passive investing strategies. So if you had to pick one specific strategy that you would like to share with the audience, what would you suggest that a new passive investor do to get started?
Yeah. So to get started, it's kind of like Nike, just do it. Regardless of what bucket of money you're coming to, I think there's a certain point where you do have to write that check. And for our left brain friends out here, there's only so much diligence. Selfishly, if I was in that position, recognizing the current climate, I'd be a little selfish. I'd want to jump into something that's kind of fully baked. Maybe that's already been paying out monthly or quarterly dividends that your money's going into almost something existing that that it's going to do pretty well. That's one thing that I would do for that initial sort of investment vis-a-vis, hey, I'm putting my money down. It's not going to go anywhere for 6 months, just going to sit there. I want to see him get that win and be like, hey, honey, look, we got checks every month, every quarter here. So I'd look to that. I think there's some great real estate, from Arizona, Texas, across the whole Sun Belt that, like you, there's many great sponsors we know. I'm more than happy to share that with folks offline.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for that. So are there any specific books or podcasts that you might suggest to the listeners?
Yeah. So in terms of books, so Ray Dalio, Changing World Order, I think is a really good one. It talks about the different hegemonies that go up and down. The U.S. vis-a-vis China's on a down, China's on the up. But obviously, Ray's going to bring economics and some other stuff. It's a real fun read. I enjoy that. And Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn fame, Master of Scale, is a great podcast. As I said, it's not straight here, real estate or investing, but you are going to talk to folks that the one takeaway I got, and I don't know if it was Ray or somebody else I was listening, I was driving to Houston to meet with an investor, and take even something like, the iPhone, and I could be paraphrasing a bit here, but, they said somebody invented it. Somebody in their garage invented some version of it. And every 5 years, this was kind of brought up or maybe even brought to market, but it really didn't catch on till, Apple in 2007 or whatever. So there's so many common things that we do these days that just, you're like, well, this person seemed, they knew their stuff and it was a good product and everything else. It just wasn't the time. So, part of kind of go full circle on our conversation today, part of my hope is that, when my son, and trust me, he's already a passive investor in a bunch of things at 6 years old, but, for all of his buddies, that by the time they're in high school, they know like, oh yeah, I can go into all these alts and here's how I can trade it. And here's the different tax advantages and deferral. And I want that to become kind of second nature. So I do feel it's coming, as to kind of, so all of us can achieve that, 21st century diversification.
I love it. And I share that same passion. Absolutely. And that's really the goal of what we do here. So one final question, and this is kind of an odd one. I'm curious, do you have a recent bucket list item that you've checked off the list and one you're hoping to soon?
I do. And I mean, I hope you guys aren't blinded by my bald head here, the gray hair, but yeah, copy paste. But, we have one son, he's the best. And so especially, having a child later in life, I view things, personally, although we will travel and such, we'll be fortunate. I don't need to per se. I'd say the most, we went back to Guadalajara. It's where I met my wife. I was in my old neighborhood. And now that he was 6 years old, he kind of understood where mom's from and everything else. And, kind of keeping it in the time zone in the country, I'd say, we'll travel around a little more, much like my fellow Thunderbird MBAs. But I'd say in the near term, for me, it's to play dad, whether it's going to be little league or soccer or the Saturday morning coaching. For me, that's a super high priority that, once again, being self-employed, having control of your schedule and knowing that even if you kind of goose egg with your new day job, you are getting some passive income coming in, allows you to have these things. I'd say these kind of milestones that, with your kids that you're only going to have for certain years. So with that, I'll be Coach Dad, come May.
I love it. Very good. Very good. Well, Dan, you've brought a ton of value to the audience here. I think, again, the timeliness of this getting published, hopefully we'll be able to help a handful of listeners. If anything, plant the seed about all of the options that are available and just the tremendous amount of power that you can get by leveraging some of the tools we talked today. So, Dan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Awesome, Randy. Thanks so much.
All right. And to our listeners, as always, we'll put Dan's social and contact information in the show notes. Reach out to Dan. He's extremely knowledgeable, knows this stuff inside and out. And finally, as we always say, continue the education path on passive investing. Gain the education, gain the confidence, and pull the trigger on that first passive investment deal. We are so confident that once you do, you'll do many, many more and never look back. So thank you, listeners, for being with us today, and we'll look forward to our next show with you.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.